So fellas, as the UFC enters 2025, I've got some bold predictions revolving the UFC. These aren't necessarily hot takes or unpopular opinions that nobody agrees with. I think some people would get on board, and they're also not specific fight predictions as well. They're kind of just predictions for the generalization of the UFC. Fighters, how I think they're going to perform, the state of the UFC. And we'll go in there with the first kind of bold prediction, which is we are going to see at least 3 champ versus champ fights in the UFC. If we look back at the past couple of years and all the champ versus champ fights, in 2022 we only had one. It was between Amanda Nunes and Juliana Pena. Obviously, Amanda Nunes was the featherweight champion. She moved back down to the bantamweight division. Well, she was already basically in the bantamweight division, but she had a rematch with Juliana Pena to get the belt back. Ended up winning the fight and became double champ once again. In 2023 we had 2, and they were both between Makhachev and Volkanovski. Obviously, the first one at UFC 284, Volkanovski moves up a weight class, faces Makhachev, has a really close fight, loses it, and then the second fight happened because obviously it was supposed to be Makhachev versus Oliveira 2. Volk steps in on short notice, gets knocked out in the first round, and Makhachev gets another win. And so far in 2024, we haven't had a single champ versus champ matchup, and I think that's because they've all kind of been, you know, all the champions have been building themselves up. We're going to see all of them kind of crash down in 2025. And I think we're going to see at least 3 champ versus champ fights between different champions. One of them, I think, is going to be Zhang Weili versus Valentina Shevchenko. I'd be really surprised if the UFC don't push for this matchup. Zhang Weili, she's got to fight against Tatiana Suarez at UFC 312, which, considering she's probably the most dominant women MMA fighter right now, she's probably going to win. She's been on a tear right now in the women's strawweight division, and if she keeps it up, she's going to have an insane resume that she's already collected, one of the best resumes in women MMA history, and she would also have 4 title defenses if she does beat Tatiana Suarez, which is really impressive and in my opinion warrants double champ status for a women MMA fighter. And she's number 2 pound for pound. These are the 2 highest pound for pound women in women MMA. You've got to put them against each other. You've got Shevchenko, who's basically been clearing out of division for the entire, well, basically since 2018. Obviously lost to Grasso, but she's got that win back. I think you do Shevchenko versus Fiora. I think Fiora's earned a title shot, but after that, it's got to be Shevchenko versus Weili. Give Weili a chance at moving up a weight class to fight Valentina Shevchenko. I'd say this is probably the biggest fight the UFC could make in modern women MMA history. Out of all the women MMA fights you can make right now, this, in my opinion, will be the biggest one. Champion versus champion, pound for pound number 1 versus 2. Weili versus Shevchenko. I'd be surprised if we don't see this sometime next year. Another fight that I think we're going to see in the smaller weight classes will be Alejandro Pantoja versus the winner of Merab and Umar Nurmagomedov. I don't need to tell you this, but Pantoja has cleared out the flyweight division. Like, he's fully cleared it out to the point where there is nobody left for him. I know there's a couple of contenders on the rise. We've got the likes of Manel Kape and Kai France, but he's beaten those guys before. If we're talking about fresh matchups, there's no one. He's been on an absolute tear of just multiple title wins, multiple ranked wins. The flyweight division is done for Pantoja. It's just him lapping the division over and over again. He needs to move on to bigger and better things, and that is what I think the bantamweight division is for. Obviously, we've got Merab taking on Umar Nurmagomedov at UFC 311, but it isn't even like there's a surging contender in the bantamweight division. I mean, O'Malley, Sandhagen, Figueiredo, Very Cejudo, and Yadong have all lost their last fight. Nurmagomedov is obviously fighting for the belt, and Petr Yan, he's on a 2-fight winning streak. I guess he's the top contender, but he's 2-3 in his last 5, and he's already been absolutely dominated by Merab. I think if you do Pantoja versus Merab, that's a huge fight because you've got Pantoja, who's cleared out flyweight, completely cleared it out, against Merab, who, if he beats Umar Nurmagomedov, would have completely cleared out bantamweight. And if it is Umar Nurmagomedov, I think Pantoja versus Umar would be a huge fight in the bantamweight division. So regardless of who wins that fight, I think the UFC should do Pantoja versus the winner. Maybe they do another flyweight fight for Pantoja. Maybe they do Kai France or Royval. I'm not really sure. But either way, I think Pantoja's going to stay the champion, and whoever wins between Merab and Umar, I believe, will face Pantoja in 2025. And the final one is going to be Alex Pereira versus the winner of John Jones and Tom Aspinall. Now, it's definitely not been confirmed because of John Jones's, well, to put it in plain and simple, ducking. But this is the fight that should be made in the heavyweight division. John Jones versus Tom Aspinall. I'm not going to go into it now. It's the fight that should be next in the heavyweight division, and hopefully the UFC can put that into fruition. But you've got to imagine that Alex Pereira is going to fight eventually in the heavyweight division. I mean, even if he fights Ankalaev, if he beats Ankalaev, he's going to move up to the heavyweight division. In my eyes, he's cleared out light heavyweight. I mean, I guess he hasn't beaten Carlos Ulberg and a couple other names, but nearly every single top light heavyweight he's beaten. It's got to be the heavyweight division next for Alex Pereira. John Jones has shown interest in Alex Pereira multiple times. He said it's his favourite matchup right now in the UFC, even above Aspinall. Aspinall said that he's happy to fight Alex Pereira if he gets the undisputed champion as well. So you've got to imagine that Alex Pereira moving up to the heavyweight division is almost inevitable to get that, 3-divisional champion status, which no one else has ever had. And even if Magomed Ankalaev beats him, I don't think Alex Pereira getting a title shot after that, or a rematch title shot against Ankalaev, is completely out of guard. I mean, we've seen Alex Pereira get knocked out by Israel Adesanya before, move up to the light heavyweight division, beat Blachowicz, and then become a champion. I guess it wouldn't be a champ versus champ fight because Alex Pereira wouldn't be the current champion, but I believe we will see Alex Pereira move up to the heavyweight division at some point and face the winner of Jon Jones and Tom Aspinall. And let's be honest, he's more interesting than any of the heavyweight contenders right now, respect to Volkov, Garn, and Almeida, because they are the best outside of Aspinall and Jones. But Porton, he's pound for pound one of the best. He'd be more exciting. So those are the matchups I've got. And I also think Ilia Topuria could move up, but I'm not going to completely put him on this list because obviously him versus Makhachev would be a huge fight. The UFC would be dumb to not do that fight. It would generate probably more money than the UFC have seen in many pay-per-views. This would be an absolutely huge fight. The best versus the best. Obviously, Topuria, I think, has to be Diego Lopez and Movsar Evloev in the featherweight division before he moves up. But I think the problem with Topuria moving up is he said recently that he's going to go to the lightweight division and he wants to fight Charles Oliveira, which obviously, if that's the case, he's not going to be the champion. And we're not going to see the double champ matchup that we all thought we would because he's not going to be the champion anymore. So there's a lot of question marks revolving Topuria. If you'd have asked me this question 2 weeks ago, I probably would have said Topuria moves up and faces Makhachev. But considering the current state that he's in, and he keeps hinting about vacating the belt, I can't really add him. But I think regardless, there will be at least 3 champ versus champ fights. Weili versus Shevchenko, Pantoja versus Merab or Umar, Pereira versus Aspinall or Jones, and maybe even Topuria moving up to face Makhachev in the lightweight division. The next one is I think we're going to see some major retirements this year. I think 2025 is going to be the year of retirements. We've seen some big retirements in 2024. Well, not big retirements, but some retirements. We've had Stipe Miocic retiring, but we also saw it coming. Carla Esparza, Matt Brown retired, Jack Shaw recently retired, Matt Schnell, but we haven't really seen any major retirements. But I think 2025 is going to be the year where we see some massive retirements. I think Jon Jones is going to retire. He's 37 years old, and the only matchups that I can only see him being in now is Alex Pereira and Tom Aspinall. I don't see him fighting anybody else. I mean, the fight with Tom Aspinall is probably going to be around April, July. I'm hoping it's going to be the first half of 2025. And if Tom Aspinall wins, there's no way Jones is staying in the UFC any longer. He's going to retire unless they give him an immediate rematch. I think Jones will retire if he loses to Tom Aspinall. And if he beats Tom Aspinall, he might even retire there. You know, he might retire for a win, beating the guy who everyone said he'd lose to, the boogeyman of heavyweight. He might just retire there. Or he could go and fight Alex Pereira, who's been hinting at for a while. That should be in November, so that should still be in 2025, so he's not being a champion going into 2026. If he beats Alex Pereira, or even if he loses to Alex Pereira, I don't see him sticking around after that fight. So I think regardless, whether he beats Aspinall, whether he loses to Aspinall, whether he beats Porton, whether he loses to Porton, 2025 will be the year that Jon Jones retires, and I don't think he'll enter 2026 as an active UFC fighter. Not that he's necessarily active nowadays, but yeah, Jon Jones is one of them. Dustin Poirier is another fighter that I think we're going to see retire. He's kind of been, at least said in the Octagon interview after UFC 302 that he's considering retirement, but we've been seeing a lot of tweets and a lot of news go around recently of the UFC trying to sort Dustin Poirier one final dance in the lightweight division, and I don't really care who it is, whether it's Nate Diaz, whether it's Justin Gaethje, Dan Hooker, another rematch, whoever it is. I think he's going to retire at his next fight. I'm 99% sure of it. I think we are going to see Dustin Poirier's final fight in 2025. He keeps hinting about this last dance. He almost retired after the Makhachev fight, but I think Dustin Poirier will definitely retire next year. Tony Ferguson, I think, will finally, after a long time of having to retire, I think he'll finally decide to retire in 2025. He did another thing like Dustin Poirier where he kind of half retired at UFC Saudi Arabia or UFC Abu Dhabi when he lost to Chiesa. He's on the biggest losing streak in the UFC right now. He's 40 years old in the most competitive division. I think there's multiple scenarios that can go on with Tony Ferguson. He could just announce retirement online. He could just go online and say that he's not fighting again. He could fight again, lose once again, and this time he'll fully retire. I think if Ferguson loses again, I think he'll finally decide to fully retire. He almost did it after losing to Chiesa. I can't see him sticking around if he loses once again. The best case scenario is he comes back to the UFC, has another fight, wins the fight, and then retires coming off a win. He's ended the losing streak. He's coming off a win. We all remember Tony Ferguson for being the guy that won his last fight. That's the best case scenario. Or he could fight, win, decide to continue fighting because he's won, and then he loses again and retires. I think those 4 scenarios, whatever happens out of those 4, is all going to result in Tony Ferguson retiring in 2025. I think finally we're going to see the end of Ferguson. Usman is another fighter that I think we're going to see retire next year. He's 37 years old on a 3-fight losing streak, hasn't won since 2021 against Covington, and he's got terrible knees. I think the retirement for Usman is coming closer and closer. I think he's got 2 pills to take. The blue pill, which is telling him to retire from the sport and put the gloves up, and then the second one, which is a red pill, saying that there's still a potential title run that Usman can go on and become a potential 2-time welterweight champion. And I think in the back of his mind, he's looking at that red pill and he wants to go on a potential title run. His next fight is probably going to be against Jack Del Madlena at UFC 312. That's what I've been hearing. Or maybe they do Buckley. Buckley called him out. A lot of people are on board with that matchup. Regardless of who he fights, if he loses against Buckley or JDM, I think he's going to retire. There's no point in staying around if you lose to another contender. That's a 4-fight losing streak. You know, you've lost another fight. The title aspirations or a second title run is kind of over. And if he beats those guys, I reckon he'll fight the winner of Shavkat and Belal. And I'm hoping if he's smart, whether he wins or loses it, a title shot to the winner of Belal and Shavkat, he's going to retire. If you win, you've just won the belt back, a massive way to end off your career as a champion. And if he loses, no more title run for Usman. You've had your second title run. You've lost. Go on, you know, just hang the gloves up already. Stephen Wonderboy Thompson is a fighter that I'm not super confident he's going to retire, but I think he might in 2025. It's not like his performances are terrible. Like, it was only a few years ago when he absolutely battered Kevin Holland in that Fight Night main event. But he's 41 years old now, competing in the welterweight division. He's lost 4 of his last 5, and he's now on a 2-fight finishing streak. And he just got knocked out by Buckley at UFC 307 in a pretty brutal fashion. I reckon his next fight's going to be against an unranked welterweight. Whether it's Muslim Salikov, Zaleski dos Santos, maybe Brian Battle, I think that'll be a good fight. I think he will retire at his next fight. He probably fights again, maybe loses, but I think 2025 will be the year where Stephen Wonderboy Thompson hangs the gloves up. And Anthony Smith finally as well. Smith needs to retire. I mean, he's had to for a while. He keeps, after UFC 309 or 310, shall I say, he said that he wants to have this ideal scenario where he has a full-on retirement fight. And it's getting closer and closer. He keeps losing on a consistent basis. I know he's picked up a win here and there, but on the trajectory for his career is that he keeps losing. He was in a complete state at his fight at UFC 310. I think he fights somebody like Jacoby, Zhang Ming Yang, Umar Sy, or just someone that's going to build a name off him. He's going to lose again, and I think in his next fight he will fully retire. Or maybe he just announces the retirement online. But I think my point is that we're going to see a lot of major retirements. I think we're going to see one of the biggest years in UFC history when it comes to pure retirements. A lot of fighters putting the gloves up, a lot of legends, a lot of massive, I guess, stars in the UFC that are going to finally retire in 2025 is going to be another bold prediction. My next one is that Ilia Topuria will take his first loss in 2025 now. Topuria, one of the best in the world. He's got arguably the greatest back-to-back wins in UFC history by knocking out Volkan Holloway, making history. He's undefeated, 16-0 as a champion. He's pound-for-pound top 5, best on the planet. But I think he's going to go into the lightweight division this year, 16-0, and he's going to lose in the lightweight division and become a 16-1 fighter. If he faces Islam Makhachev, I know how good Topuria is, but Makhachev's the best in the world. I don't see him beating Makhachev at 155. Makhachev is just too skilled. He's too well-rounded. He's got the wrestling. He's got the striking. There's practically nowhere where I necessarily favour Topuria. Maybe in just a pure boxing. But I think the fight would go in Makhachev's favour. And if he faces Oliveira, let's say he goes up to the lightweight division and faces Charles Oliveira in his first fight. I'm not going to do a full-blown prediction now, but I think Oliveira beats Topuria as well. Oliveira's a really bad matchup. Very scary jiu-jitsu. He's now recently implemented wrestling, as he showed against Michael Chandler. He's one of the hardest hitting guys in 155. And he's pretty much cleared out the entire division apart from the 2 heavy wrestlers at the top in Makhachev and Sarukian, who happen to be the best as well. So I think Oliveira beats Topuria. So if Topuria does start off with Oliveira, I don't see him winning. And even if he beats Oliveira, the likelihood is he's going to get a title shot later this year against Makhachev, who I think beats him anyway. So I think in the featherweight division as well, you can't really count him out. I know I would definitely favour Topuria to stay as a champion in the featherweight division, but who knows? Maybe Diego Lopez, maybe Volk beats him in a rematch, maybe Movsarevloev gets his shot and beats him, maybe a featherweight beats him, but I think regardless of what happens, Ilia Topuria will take his first loss. I personally think he's going to have another fight at featherweight, win, move up to lightweight and lose. He'll take his first loss. I think he'll remain a champion. I just don't see him leaving 2025 as undefeated anymore. The next one, this isn't really necessarily a bold prediction. A lot of people are on board with this, but Conor McGregor won't fight. Once again, I think he's going to be inactive. 2022, I didn't expect him to come back. He's recovering from the leg injury. 2023, I thought he was going to come back. You know, we had the Ultimate Fighter series with Michael Chandler. There was a big rivalry going on. They had a massive face-off, and he kept hinting towards a fight later on in 2023. He kept saying December 2023 is going to be the fight between him and Michael Chandler, which obviously never ended up happening. And then Dana White announces post-fight press conference of UFC 300, McGregor versus Chandler at UFC 303. So we're expecting that McGregor to come back to me in 2024, and obviously that didn't happen. He got a toe injury and pulled out of the fight, the only announced fight that he's had in the past 4 years. And after these 3 years of constant fights that have been pulled out, I think now is more of an unlikely time than ever. You know, he's going through these court cases, he's dealing with these legal things that are going on outside the octagon, which I think is going to completely halt his ability to get back in the octagon. And on top of that, I ain't here to fat shame him, but the dude looks like a middleweight. How is this guy going to make 155 or even 170? He looks huge. Obviously, he's been bulking up for the movies and stuff, but this dude looks like a middleweight. And it's not even like the Chandler fight is on the table anymore. I don't think anyone really cares about that fight. Not only because it's been dragged on for so long, But Chandler's just been dominated by Charles Oliveira. He just lost once again, so that fight's lost even more hype. And McGregor, he's lost his last 2 fights back in 2021. He's been inactive for 4 years. He's out clubbing and partying and dealing with these court cases. 2023, I thought he could have come back. 2024, I thought we were going to see the return. But 2025, or basically the future, I don't see we're going to see Conor McGregor come back. I don't think we're going to see him come back. I believe Conor McGregor will not fight in 2025. And I believe the final Conor McGregor could perform. I'm not saying he won't compete in any form of combat sports. I do believe McGregor, whether it be boxing or bare knuckle, whatever it may be, I think we'll see him fight at least once again before he's fully done with combat sports. But in the UFC, I don't know if we're going to see Conor McGregor fight again, just because of what's been going on recently and everything surrounding his life. I do not believe we're going to see McGregor. The next one is that Khamzat Chimaev will only fight once in 2025, but it will be a W and he will become a champion. It's almost, he's got to be getting a title shot in his next fight, does Chimaev. I mean, he's been in an absolute tear right now in the UFC, just mauled Robert Whittaker at UFC 3, what card was it? UFC 308 in dominant fashion, and just, you know, got that face crank, destroyed his jaw, got the win, submitted Whittaker early on in brutal fashion. If that isn't a title shot worthy performance, I don't know what is. But you look at his record, he's a very inactive fighter. I'm not saying it's necessarily his fault. I know he's got illnesses and visa issues, but he's very inactive. I mean, his past 3 wins between Holland, Usman, and Whittaker have all been between the space of 35 months or 3 years. Buckley's fought more in 2024 than Chimaev has in the past 3 years. And on top of that, to make things worse, apparently he can't fight in the United States because of a travel ban, so he's basically restricted to just pure Abu Dhabi events. And if we look at the UFC historically, they only really tend to do an Abu Dhabi pay-per-view once a year. I know they do fight nights multiple times a year, but when it comes to just pure pay-per-views, they do it once a year, and Chimaev's past fight nights now. You know, he's getting a title shot in his next fight. He's not going to be on these fight nights no longer. So I think he'll probably fight in some Abu Dhabi pay-per-view next year against the winner of Dricus du Plessis versus Sean Strickland. And I think he wins. You know, what he showed me in that Whittaker fight and just how good his wrestling is, I think he will be able to pull off a win against the winner of Dricus versus Strickland, but I think he'll only fight once. I don't think he's going to fight multiple times next year. I think it'll be a 1 fight and it's just done in Abu Dhabi, maybe towards the end of the year in October, because that's usually when they do it, which obviously is not going to support the narrative that he's going to fight more than once a year. But I think he'll fight once, but he'll become a champion. Hopefully in the future they can sort out his visa issue so we can fight in America, so we can fight multiple times a year. But next year, because there's less opponents for him, because he's right at the top of the division and there's only 1 fighter and it's really the winner of Dricus and Strickland, I think he'll fight once and he's going to continue to be inactive. And then the next one is that there will be a Dagestani/Chechnya takeover in the UFC. I've heard a lot of kind of rage baiters on Twitter say this, but the more that you look at it, I think this is actually going to happen. I mean, we've obviously got Islam Makhachev in the lightweight division, and I don't think anyone beats him, whether it be Tapori moving up, Sarukian, Oliveira, Holloway. I don't think anyone's going to take that belt away from Makhachev. We've obviously, like I just said, I think Chimaev's going to become a champion next year. He's going to beat the winner of Dricus du Plessis and Strickland, so we're going to have Chimaev and Islam Makhachev as champions. At UFC 311 on that same Makhachev card, we've got Umar Nurmagomedov taking on Merab, and I think Umar Nurmagomedov beats Merab, and I think he'll defend against either PTN, Sean O'Malley, even Pantoja moving up, and he'll win those fights and end the year off as a champion. So I think these 3 guys alone are going to become a champion and represent that Dagestani/Chechnya area of the world. And then on top of that, you've got Ankalaev versus Pereira. Now, I don't really know who to predict. I haven't really thought about a prediction for this fight, but this is definitely going to happen. And without a doubt, Ankalaev is Pereira's toughest test in the light heavyweight division, in my opinion. So you've also got the potential of Magomed Ankalaev becoming a champion in this year as well. And that's not even to mention Movsar Evloev, who's 19-0, undefeated, top 5 in the featherweight division. Sharply to Magomedov, 15-0, undefeated, ranked in the middleweight division. Nasruddin Imavov, 15-4. Top 5 in the middleweight division, and I know a lot of people like to say he's French. I think he reps France and Dagestan, so at least he was from Dagestan from his place of birth, so you can give him that. And he's going to be fighting Adesanya in his next fight, and you've got to imagine if he beats Adesanya, that's a title shot worthy performance. And that's not even to mention all the other Dagestanis on the come up. We've just had a guy, Rizvan Kruniev, who's booked against Curtis Blades. We've still got the likes of Abbas Magomedov, Ikram Aliskerov, undefeated Azamat Mirzakhanov, Shamil Gaziev, Tagir Ulanbekov. I'm not saying these guys are ever going to become a champion, but they're also names that you can kind of, you think are going to succeed in the UFC. So I think we're going to see the Dagestani/Chechnya takeover in 2025, where a lot of these kind of Dagestani fighters from that place of the world are going to take over an extra few champions, an extra few contenders, and I believe that'll happen in 2025. But those are my bold predictions for the UFC in 2025. Let me know your thoughts on these predictions if you agree, disagree. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.